What is going on, everybody, and welcome to the first real episode of Down on the Farm. My name is Eric Cole. I think it's fair to say that most of you are probably more familiar with me from my Braves coverage, where I've been covering the minor leagues over on Talking Chop since 2015 or so. But this is going to be a little bit different because I have in the past delved a little bit into league-wide minor league coverage, and that's what this podcast is going to be about. League-wide minor league coverage. Again, I did a little bit of writing for this minor league ball back several years ago while that site was still operational. But I figured if we were going to make a podcast about the minor leagues at large, that I needed to bring in some help, and I needed to bring in some heavy lifting. And to help me with that is basically John Sickles was certainly the heart and soul of minor league ball, but the guy who got things done and made sure that a lot of coverage happened was the man that's going to be working on this podcast with me, one Wayne Cavati. Wayne, how are you?
I am great, and thank you for that introduction. That was very humbling. I missed the minor league ball days, and when you asked me to jump on, obviously, I do Talking Chop minor league stuff and very Brave centric. But when you proposed the idea of getting back into league-wide minor league baseball, I don't think I hesitated. I jumped right back in, so I'm definitely excited to be back on the show and looking at minor league baseball.
Yeah, the minor league ball days were really fun, and I think that there's always going to be a space for kind of general prospect coverage, because the fact of the matter is that most fans of their teams only care about the top 100 guys, right? The top prospects and things like that. And we're certainly going to be giving you updates on those guys. But what our goal is with this podcast is to make sure that you are not only kind of keeping tabs on those top guys, those names that we all become familiar with when the top 100 lists and team organizational top 30 lists come out. We're going to try to keep tabs on those guys, but we're also going to try to bring new names to the discussion that are kind of trying to break through into those conversations, and as well as guys who frankly don't deserve to be on top 100 lists, guys who are kind of there more on reputation than actually on production. And the idea is to kind of get some trends going. It's like, hey, these are the guys that are in AA that are performing really well. These are the guys that are not. Maybe we need to be kind of like continually rethinking about what we think of prospects and how they've been developing, rather than just kind of like waiting every 4 or 5 months for a new version of a top 100 to show up. Because let's just be clear, every top 100 list is different. One guy can be ranked 30, and then on another list he can be ranked 80. And these are the things that happen. And so we don't want to necessarily get too hung up on where a guy is ranked by which publication and where, and trying to like get the updated quote unquote scouting report just again in those big chunks of time. We want to kind of do week by week. Hey, this guy's performing really well. This guy hasn't been doing so hot. And we can bring other new names into the conversation while also keep you guys updated. This will be a weekly show, and we're going to do our best to kind of limit it to 30 to 45 minutes. If I know Wayne and myself, we'll probably run over more often than we won't. But hopefully we'll be able to kind of keep this as kind of like a relatively tight podcast. Again, just for those of you who want to just kind of keep up with prospects and maybe kind of expand your horizons a little bit, but you don't necessarily want to dig through like all the top 100 scouting report lists that are all out there. There's a lot of information out there in the world about the minor leagues and the prospects right now. It's kind of hard to all parse. Our goal is to make that easier to parse. Our goal is just to make it easier for you to keep up with what's going on out there and kind of how promotions are happening, who's worthy of such promotions, and who you guys need to be keeping an eye on, either for your respective teams or if you're just a big fan of the minor leagues like us. Again, my background is pretty strictly with the Braves in terms of like where I was really digging deep. Wayne has tons of experience in kind of the minor leagues in general, but particularly with the Braves and the Yankees. But we want to be able to. We're also a fan of the minor leagues in general. We want to make sure we can talk about these guys as a whole. And so how this is going to work each week is that we're going to each come up with some names that are either performing well or not at each level. So it's not going to be by team. It's not going to be by, organization or anything like that. We're going to go by league. So it's going to be AAA, then AA, then high A, then low A. That's what we're going to do each week. Makes life a lot easier for everyone just to kind of like figure out if you need to skip ahead and find out about a particular guy, if he makes the list or not, then you can kind of skip ahead and kind of be eyeballing that as you go forward. Or you can listen to the whole thing, which is what I highly encourage you to do, because who knows, you might actually learn something. So Wayne, that brings us to AAA, which is just one step away from the show. It seems like more often than not these days, it just ends up being a ton of quad A players that are just veterans that they're just waiting to, because they've kind of extended the bench and the bullpen of their big league clubs. But there are some really good prospects in AAA right now who are some guys that have caught your eye, either good or bad?
Well, I'm going to start off with, because my Twitter feed is open while we're doing this, and he wasn't on my AAA list because he's making his AAA debut tonight. But Hunter Green, according to a tweet from the Louisville Bats, just hit 104 miles an hour in his AAA debut. So he's definitely a guy.
Good God.
Yes. I mean, he's been tearing up AA. This tonight was his AAA debut. I didn't have him on the list. We'll talk about him more when he could be an official AAA player, maybe next week. But we definitely had to give a shout out to hitting 104 miles per hour in your AAA debut. That being said, and I'm sure one of my things, I like you, Eric, we start out in Rome, right? And when I got into minor league ball, I did a lot of work at Rome and Hickory. So we start with these guys on the low level, right? We see these guys break in and we get to follow them all the way up. For me, with D2 baseball and college baseball is another thing that I cover. I see guys way, way young. And one of those guys was Jojo Gray on the Dodgers. When I first started covering him, he was on Little Lemoyne in upstate New York. And he was a shortstop, right? And then he went to the Cape and he had this breakout somewhere where he was hitting mid 90s, and all of a sudden his coach was like, okay, he did shortstop and relief pitcher, and they're like, you got to be our starting pitcher. And then his last year in D2, he was arguably the best pitcher in D2 baseball, and he got drafted and then traded to the Dodgers. And he made his debut earlier this year. He's great, right? He attacks the zone. He throws strikes. He started to develop this knuckle curve and slider, and so now he has a complete arsenal. But that said, he had a great 5-inning debut, and he's been on the DL now for maybe 5 weeks. But from what I've heard, it sounds like he's pretty close to getting back. So he's a guy I wanted to talk about because I have high hopes for him. I mean, he's a top 100 prospect. I'm not like pulling a name out of the air here, but. Yeah,
we know you're just digging for the D2 guys. We know what's
I'll always give the D2 love. But he's touching upper 90s, and now that he's close to getting back, I think he's a guy that we got to get back on our radar. And that brings me to another guy that's on everybody's radar, and that's Jarred Kelenic. And I thought this was a good name to talk about because, Eric, we can go back and forth on kind of this, but like, what do we make of the start to this season? Are we hoping it's just a layoff? Because here's a top 5 prospect in the game, pretty much universal, right? Pretty much everyone has him maybe 6th as the highest. And he didn't look very good when he made his big league debut. And that could be because, again, of the layoff. There was a whole year laid off. He went back to Tacoma this past week, and he had a nice little 3-game run. He had a couple of home runs. But with Kyle Lewis being out, I'm sure you were the same when you saw him get the call. You kind of probably had different expectations about how that debut was going to go. Am I right?
I definitely thought he was going to be better than he was, right? But here's the problem. One is that I don't think we've ever seen a bigger gap between AAA and the major leagues than we have right now. Between the amount of information that's available for you from a scouting perspective at AAA versus the major leagues, and just the skill gap seems higher in addition to that, and that kind of compounds things, right? And he's still really young. He was drafted as a prep bat. This isn't like a college kid that was drafted and has a ton of experience under his belt. So it's not like crazy concerning or crazy to see a guy like that struggle like that. It's also worth mentioning that the Seattle Mariners royally screwed up this kid, during the offseason, basically point blank told the kid that we are going to manipulate your service time if you don't sign this contract extension. They got caught doing it. They end up losing their team president over it, and he had very strong thoughts on the matter. It's been a bit tumultuous, to say the least. And then all of a sudden he gets called up, and everyone kind of knows, you're calling him up only because now that you get the extra year service time out of him.
Right.
I'm giving him a pass just because, again, there is the layoff. He's still really young. The guy can obviously play, and his organization, frankly, is pretty stupid in terms of how they've handled him. So, I'm giving him a pass. I think he'll be just fine.
And not just him, right? We've seen the Mariners do this in the past, right? With plenty.
Oh yeah, no. The only reason we see Evan White in the major leagues right now is because he signed an extension.
Yeah.
Full stop. And he hasn't been very good. So.
Yeah. And then one other guy was Florial on Scranton. He's a guy that, he's been up and down a little bit with the Yankees. He's a guy I know that when back in minor league ball days, I know that he was one of the guys you covered for us, and I'm always apprehensive. I'm a Yankees fan. I don't hide that. So I'm a little more critical of Yankees prospects. I've seen the overhype. And when we saw him, I remember he was a very highly rated prospect, but there were definitely flaws. And now that he's at the higher level, those flaws are kind of being exposed. He has a nice little hit tool. He definitely has the speed. But the question is he going to put them together above this level? And it's early. There was the layoff, but I still think that that's a big question mark on him.
Yeah, he was a guy, when I saw him, I mean, this was, again, in low A way back
Right.
then. He was very, very raw, but, like, when he hit the ball, he hit the crap out of it. So it wasn't, like, he's a guy that, like, again, I don't feel like that he is behind schedule. I don't think, if anything, he's ahead of it. You know what I mean? Like, there were real concerns about that hit tool when he was lower in the minors, right? And it's a situation where, maybe he just needs a little bit more time, and that Yankees organization, there's not necessarily a need to rush him. I mean, I know that they've had to bring him up kind of like for like quick stints and for quick service here and there, but it seems pretty clear that they're more than content just to let him kind of chill out in AAA and kind of just continue to develop, work on his patience at the plate, kind of work his ability to hit the ball the other way, and cut down on some of that that wildness in terms of his strikeouts. And I mean, he has some at bats where he'll look like a major leaguer, and there's others where you're just like, what were you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what was your plan in that at bat? Because it seemed like your plan was close your eyes and hope. And again, he's still a young guy. You know what I mean? A lot of these guys who are signed at really young ages, just give them some time. Like repetitions. I think that we're so the guys like Ronald Acuna and guys who are these international prospects that like end up shooting through systems. Wander Franco's another guy who I'll talk about here in a minute. But like we kind of get spoiled by those guys when the reality is just a lot of guys just need time and just learn how to play the game. I mean, they're signing kids. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So again, I like Florial a lot, and I think that he's actually come a long way. And he's doing exactly what you want to do in a minor league system, is just to get better. He's just not doing it at some like exponential rate. And that's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky. So for me, I have a few guys. One is a name that probably people know by now, Jo Adell, top Angels prospect. He failed to make camp with the Angels this year, again, after a really, really tough 2020 season. Just made his debut with the Angels, did not do particularly well. Has really done well for himself in AAA. OPS over 1,000 with 16 home runs already in the minor leagues, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, considering that they just got started like at the beginning of May, and he already has 16. Strikeout rate's still pretty high, at a third of the time, and it's actually not appreciably different from what we saw in the major leagues. Like, he was striking out a whole bunch in the major leagues too. So I guess my question to you on Jo is, like, what are your expectations for him? Because, I mean, he's a pretty consistent top 15, top 20 guy, even after the tough 2020 season. He has a ton of power and is, like, oozing in athleticism. But is he a guy that you're worried about long term, or is he a guy that just probably just needed a little bit more seasoning?
I mean, I think he is a little older, right, than some of the guys we were just talking about. But I think he just needs some seasoning. Like the power, like you said, 16 home runs, and what have they played? 30, 35 games? I mean, it's outrageous. The power's for real. Where he is as a fielder, where he is. I mean, the strikeout thing, it's going to happen. That's just the way baseball is now. You're not going to have a Tony Gwynn. You just want the strikeouts to be manageable, right? And I think with the hit tool that he has, and especially the power tool, I think we're getting to the point where we don't have to say it's raw power. It's game power with him. And I think what he's showing now in AAA, and again, like you said, the 2020 season did no favors to him at all. And I think he just needed to step back and, play without that pressure of the big time debut being this top 20 prospect, like 4 years running, whatever it was. And he's settling in and in the PC or AAA West, whatever we call it now. Sorry. And
yeah, the reorganization's been pretty weird in terms of calling the leagues. It's been weird.
but he is settling in, and he's the player that we know he is, and the strikeouts are going to be there. But I mean, I think he has close to 30 extra base hits in total. Like so. He's going to be just fine, especially on the Angels. I mean, if you can get him in next to Mike Trout, it's going to be exciting.
Well, it definitely should be exciting. The only thing I'm concerned about is a guy who's already striking out like a third of the time in AAA is again about that gap that we talked about. Is that because like if there's a book written about you in terms of like this is how you get this guy out in AAA, that allows you to strike out a third of the time. I worry a little bit. I say a little bit that once you get to the major leagues that is compounded in this day and age. And it's particularly true of Adele, who's he's a bit free swinging. Like he's not going up there trying to poke the ball the other way. He's trying to hit the ball to Jupiter. And, and he could be that guy. Like he has all the speed in the world. I'm not worried about him defensively. He moves around really well. Again, a super athletic guy. But like his approach at the plate is to hit the crap out of the ball and ask questions later. And when you have holes in your swing like he does, and like kind of that breaking stuff on the outer third of the plate, which seems to be a problem for a lot of guys right now, and he just like doesn't pick that up quite as well, and has looked pretty silly at times when he was in the majors. It's a little bit of a concern, and so I'm happy that the Angels are kind of letting him work on stuff and kind of see how he performs against the things that he struggles with. Well, like it'd be pretty easy to look at like wow, this guy's already hit 16 homers, let's bring him up because that Angels team really could use it, right? But they're being smart about it this time around. They're like, hey, he wasn't ready last year. He looked ready. We have some things that we need him to work on. So speaking of guys who have come up very quickly and are young, can we talk about Wander Franco for a second? And I mean, I know like there's a real risk here that we'll basically talk about him every week until he's called up because this is the top prospect in baseball. You won't ever convince me otherwise. He has hit safely for the month of June. 14 straight games. This is after what I would call a moderately slow start for him. Like he was still like, very good, but now he's just gone nuclear. Has an OPS close to 1,000, only 20 years old in AAA, and worth mentioning, has played a little second base and a little third base. Just what the Rays need, another crazy versatile player that can also like be like one of the best players in baseball. And that's what his ceiling is. In terms of his hit tool and what he does at the plate, he could be one of the absolute best, right? Is there any debate about that?
No. I mean, he's one of the – it's like you said, the Ronald Acuñas, when you were saying that we're spoiled by players like that. This is one of those players, right? And there's been a lot made. I'm sure you've seen it, like the Rays cleared a 40-man roster spot, and obviously Tampa fans are why is Franco not here yet? And as a Yankee fan, I think the Rays plan is beautiful and keep him in the minors as long as we can because when he gets to the AL East, he's going to be a nightmare. And he's just one of those guys that he does everything well and he doesn't look out of his league wherever he is. And like you said, he's 20 years old, so it's really impressive to watch him do what he does.
That Rays system is just wild to me because like they trade Willy Adames, right? And everyone's like, it's Wander time. And then you remember, wait, they have Vidal Brujan too. Maybe it's going to be him. And then instead they go with Taylor Wells, who's just another guy who's just like a crazy good defender, walks all the time. Not like a particularly awesome hitter, but like for that team, like that's like perfect like Moneyball. Like, hey, just get on base a bunch. The amazing Randy will take care of things from there. But these other guys that we have claimed as reclamation projects or completely fixed ourselves, we'll take care of the rest. As long as you're on base, good things will happen. And that's what they've done. So I wish I had a good sense as to when they call him up. But this heater he's on right now, he's going to have to start. People are going to start asking more and more as to when they're going to call him up. And with that team looking awfully good, I would imagine that we see him this year, and I look forward to that, especially as someone who's not a Yankees fan whatsoever. A guy that's been struggling, and I was actually a little bit surprised once I kind of dug into it a little bit, Mackenzie Gore. Former first rounder, considered one of the best pitching prospects in the game. Like, we thought he was going to be in a Padres uniform last year. There was talk that he was going to be like put on the postseason roster, even though he hadn't debuted yet. Just like, has that crazy delivery with the high kick. I love that. That takes real athleticism for that delivery, by the way, to actually be able to do anything remotely commanding a pitch with that big high kick of his. But since he can pull it off, it's crazy deceptive. But he hasn't looked very good this year. He's walking almost 5 batters per 9. His strikeout rate's down. He's gotten a bit unlucky. I mean, like the BABIP of 351 is like hasn't helped matters much. His ERA's sitting at 5.30, and he hasn't looked great. He's looked better lately. He was actually worse earlier in the year. So should we be concerned? Because again, with the one pitching type of prospect that's going to be the most volatile in terms of their stock is a pitching prospect. It's just always going to be the case. I mean, like guys fail at every position, but like if you're going to bet like what player, if you had 5 random players to pick, which one was likely just to flame out of like top 20 guys, you should pick the pitcher every time. And
for sure.
And like as good as he is, what's your concern level here?
Well, I mean, so here's the way you got to look at it, right? And you'll especially with the way that we cover low A ball, you know this. His ERA is high, things like that. You look at, you can't really take that as a concern when it comes to prospects, right? Because you have no idea what the fielding is behind him, and he could be very hittable, especially in the AAA West where balls are more hittable. But
true.
Yes, what you do have to look at, and it's funny that you brought him up because I was looking at him to talk about him earlier, so I knew these numbers. In his last full season, that 2019 season, right? He walked 28 batters in 100 innings. He's already walked 10 in his first, 5 starts, 18 innings. So that is an area for concern, right? Getting hit every now and then, that happens. Having high runs scored against you, especially in the AAA West and the PCL, that's always the case for pitchers. But when your walks jump up to 5 per game and you've never even come close to that in your career, that's a little concern, but I don't want to say we're on the verge of the panic button yet, but it's definitely something that has to be, eye-opening and watched. But this is also a guy, like you said, like you were saying, he has the talent that the next 5 games he may walk two batters. So it's something it's alarming. It's something you have to start watching, but it's not panic button just yet, in my opinion.
Oh, I don't disagree. And again, worth mentioning, pretty small sample so far. So something that we're going to be kind of keeping an eye on going through week to week. So now we go to AA, which has been probably one of the more interesting levels to look at in terms of like who's performing well, who hasn't been. So talk to me about your AA guys.
There were so many. So I picked 2 that everybody knows, and one that my homerism to the Yankees is a guy.
I knew it was coming.
I want everyone to watch. I'll start with the ones that everyone knows, because if you haven't been watching Bobby Witt Jr., you haven't been watching minor league baseball, because he's everywhere. Here's a dude. He had 164 at bats in rookie ball, right? And didn't play the whole 2020, and he's having zero issue whatsoever adapting to AA. He had that 3 home run game, and that's kind of when everyone started watching him. He's a guy, again, we talked about earlier, he's a guy that has a lot of swing and miss, but like I said, who doesn't? He's still at AA, so he could work on that a little bit more, whereas in Adell's case, you mentioned that it's kind of, he's at that level where you kind of want to see it come down a little bit. So he does have that swing and miss, but in June, he's hitting 300. He's got a 1.035 OPS, 4 home runs, 8 extra bases in total. And not last year, 2019, it wasn't the greatest start, but when you looked at his ground ball rate, he was just driving it into the ground. It was a 52% ground ball rate. And this year, he's got a lot more lofts. He's hitting, it's the polar opposite. It's a 52% fly ball rate. So he's a primarily pull hitter, but he's getting the ball in the air to all fields right now. And he's super exciting. And another guy is a guy I actually got to see play in college, and Adley, Roachman from on Bowie, and Oregon State, and he's just, I don't remember many catching prospects that we've seen like him over the past few years. He does it all. He's no Shea Langoliers behind the plate when it comes to throwing out.
I was about to ask, not in terms of a hitting prospect, but who's the best catching prospect between those two?
Yeah, what Shea's doing behind the plate this year is remarkable, and what's he throwing out, like 15 of 26 base runners? It's something I don't know.
It keeps getting higher and higher because guys are the only guys that are trying are the ones that aren't paying attention. So
Right. But Adley just, I mean, he crushes the ball to all fields, and he just has this plate discipline that was second to none. And you kind of wondered if it was a college. There's these hitters in college that are just so much better than everyone else. But on the season, he has a 431 on base percentage. This is a guy that just knows how to take walks and wait for his pitch, and he is going to hit. And he has played a little bit first base and DH. So to your, Shea being the better catching prospect, we haven't seen Shea at first base, right? So
there's no chance.
So
none.
I mean, his bat is undeniable. So maybe the Orioles are looking into ways to get his bat in the lineup as much and often as possible. And then the last guy I want to just touch on is Glenn Otto. He's with the Yankees as the Yankees pitcher. I saw him at Charleston several times when they came to Rome, and I really liked him then. He has a good. When I saw him, and again, this was when he was much younger, he had a good fastball curveball combo. I have my buddies, Ricky Keeler at Pinstripe Prospects, who keeps me up to date on all the Yankee stuff with him working in the minors, and he said that, the fastball curveball combo is much better. But he spoke to Luke Voigt the other day, and you remember when I talked to Tukey, one of the questions we wanted to ask him was what prospects stood out to him on his rehab assignment. So Ricky asked Luke Voigt what prospect stood out to him on his rehab assignment, and he said Otto, right? And when you look at what Otto's been doing, he has been allowing a couple runs here and there, but his last three games, the strikeouts were 10, 10, and 14, right? And he's going like 6 innings. This isn't like complete games, so he's striking out guys in bunches. And for Voigt to say, Glenn Otto, when you have a team with like Donnie Sands and Oswaldo Peraza and these like top 100 prospect type of guys, I liked Otto in the first place. To hear someone like that say that, it kind of made me like, ooh, like maybe this is a guy that can, come up the ladder a little bit out of nowhere and be that exciting guy, kind of like a Jordan Montgomery, who's not a sensational guy, a sensational pitcher. But he had that slow rise, and he's a guy, he's reliable as a back end of rotation guy. He's never going to be an ace or an all-star, but you need Glenn Ottos and Jordan Montgomerys of the world, So yeah, Glenn Otto was my last guy, and I don't remember if you got to see him pitch when he was in Charleston and Rome, but he's a guy I like.
No, I think that I missed, like, there was one of those weekends where like I was trying to meet up with you up there, and like he pitched the night before, and you talked to me about it. I remember you talking to me about him, but I don't remember him pitching. It seemed like any game that you and I watched turned into a dumpster fire in a hurry. I remember that specifically. Like it ended up like like both teams forgot how to play defense, and then like all of a sudden it's like like relievers that like we've barely heard of are all of a sudden are in play. Like the game ends up being 10-7. Like it's just kind of what generally happened when you and I were at Rome at the same time. I do have a few guys as well, and I'll try to run through them relatively quickly. Word to the wise: if you have a prospect and the Tampa Rays are interested in trading for them, you should not do it. And the Pirates have found that out because Shane Baz, the first-round pick for the Pirates back in 2017, he put on a Rays uniform. Again, that first season when he was making those adjustments wasn't that particularly great. But now all of a sudden, and again, I'm cheating a little bit here with Baz because he just got promoted to AAA. But I want to talk a little bit about what he did in AA. He's striking out 13.5 batters per 9. ERA is just over 2 for the season, and that is including the start at AAA that he's already made. Just everything looks live with him. Like he seems like the hitters just can't pick up his fastball and can't pick up his breaking ball. That tunnel he has, like halfway to the plate, it seems like those batters have no idea what pitch they're getting until it is far too late. He gets some ugly swings. And again, this is why you just should not trade with the Tampa Rays, because they know your guys as good, if not better, than you do.
He wasn't part of the Austin Meadows deal, was he?
So he was all player to be named later. Like I can't remember exactly what the deal was. I'll have to look at that here in a second. So the next guy I want to talk about is Nolan Gorman, who had a pretty ordinary 2019 season considering what we were expecting from him. He was a 2018 first rounder. We thought he was actually going to go a little bit higher as possibly like a possible top 10 pick, and I'm going a little bit later. Again, those prep bats, sometimes they end up falling because he was a guy that everyone knew he had raw power as a kid, but just didn't know about the swing and miss, just didn't know how that hit tool was going to translate to the pro ball. And 2019, like, he wasn't bad. He just was like a slightly above average hitter. Wasn't kind of like that like consensus top 50 prospect anymore. Everyone's like, well, I'm not so sure. But now we're in 2021. It's posted a 145 WRC plus, has 10 home runs already, and surprisingly hitting over 300. And again, the thing that you like to see, he's made progress bringing that strikeout rate down. You know, you can, with the kind of power numbers and the type of raw power this kid has, you can deal with him striking out a quarter or a third of the time. And that's kind of, he's been around a quarter of the time. He's bringing that walk rate up. So that helps you have more confidence in that hit tool, that maybe it will translate more to pro ball than what we've seen, you know, in the past, where we've seen these kids were like crazy raw power, but the hit tool never comes around, and you just don't really hear from him again. You're like, wow, I wish that guy would have figured it out. But the guy I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about was the guy who's struggled a little bit. And like, if you had asked me before the season which of the top 5 picks in 2019 would have struggled the most, he probably would have been at the bottom of the list, I think. I'd have to think about it a little bit harder if I'm just being honest about it. But like, he certainly wouldn't be the guy who's been struggling the most. But JJ Bleday, 4th overall pick, again, was one of the absolute best hitters in that draft. Won the collegiate home run title, has plus power, was only okay in his pro debut. But again, a guy coming off his draft year only being okay, that's not that weird. We see that happen all the time. Guys are tired after a long college season. And again, no one was concerned that Bleday was going to be a guy that like wasn't going to produce as the pros. But the 2021 season has not been kind. I mean, slashing 201, 314, 373. The walk rate's been like kind of helping him kind of be above average hitter. You know, when you're like having on base percentage is 100 points above your batting average, that's generally a good spot to be in. And it seems like pitchers are kind of respecting it a little bit. But that BABIP of his is low, and it's because his fly ball rate is at 50%. My question to you is, if a guy with like supposedly this much raw power is hitting this many fly balls, you would normally see more power production than you have seen from him. Like, how, now that we're in 2021, this is a college bat, and you would think that if he's hitting this many fly balls, we'd see more power production. Are you worried a little bit maybe some of those college numbers might be an illusion?
Well, first of all, like you said, when you were talking about thinking that he'd be struggled, I thought this was a guy that we'd see be knocking on the door of the big leagues by probably midseason. You know, they're a little, the Marlins aren't afraid to be aggressive, to say the least, with their prospects. So I agree with you to see him struggling this much. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. I put it this way: in June, he has been finding his groove a little bit more. He's hit in all but 3 games for June, you know, and he is showing a little bit of the power. Maybe it was the year layoff, but he's coming around, because I mean, he does not look good, but like you said, he is getting on base with the walk, so that's keeping him in counts and getting him pitches, and he has been hitting much better in June, so maybe he is getting comfortable, and I think we need maybe the rest of June or maybe another whole month before we start wondering if the college was one of those college illusions. Because I watched him in Omaha, and you know, watching him in batting practice was fun, right? He's one of those guys that was fun. The power is there, the hit tool is there. The beginning of this season was just not kind to him, like you said, and hopefully he's righting the ship in June, and I think we just need a little bit more time at watching him, because I mean, he was a high draft pick. He has all the tools in the world, and I don't think this is the real JJ Bleday that we're watching right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Again, he wasn't hitting cheapies in college. You know what I mean? You're absolutely, and again, he's not just kind of like a batting practice wonder either. Like, when he was in college, the home runs he was hitting were real tank jobs. I just think that maybe he's like, getting under pitches just a little bit. I don't think it'd be it wouldn't take much of things to go, like just a slightly better launch angle, maybe slightly more barrel on the ball, and all of a sudden we're talking about him as like a guy who probably needs to be pushing for time in AAA. Now we get to high A, which, again, we're kind of a little further away. having to kind of squint in our eyes and speculating a little bit as to kind of what's going on with like, what these guys are going to be going forward, how many of these numbers are real, and how many of them are just like guys who are maybe too old for the level. Who you got in high A?
Well, I got to talk about our guy, Jesse Franklin, the fifth, right?
Michigan legend, Jesse
Michigan
Franklin.
legend. Another guy I saw in Omaha in the same College World Series as Blade. I don't know what he did tonight. He was hitless in his first two at bats. I was watching before we jump on, but he had a 9-game hitting streak coming in tonight. He's just been unbelievable in June. 6 home runs, and he's barreling up on everything, spraying it to left field, right field, and he's making contact. And I don't know if you remember, but after the first week of the season, we did the Road to Atlanta podcast, and we were talking about guys on the levels that we were watching, and I brought him up, and he wasn't off to that great start, but I
he was really bad. But
right. But what I said was because remember, he got hurt going into the 2020 college baseball season, so he didn't play at all last year. He did go to the alternate site, so he got some reps in, but he didn't play organized ball at all. And what I said on that first show was I wanted to see if he was rusty and just kind of behind, or if he was just like dead in the water and like starting from fresh. And I remember that first week he had some, at least what we were being told on the broadcast was several base hits with 100-mile-per-hour exit velocity. So you knew the swing was still there, and he was just searching for that timing. And now that he's found the timing, he's got to be AA bound pretty soon, right? Like the problem is in the Braves system is outfield depth. So there's no rush to move him up. He's a modest outfielder, I would say, like, talent-wise, but he also, I think he's leading the team in stolen bases. It's either him or Michael Harris, but he's a weapon in every aspect of the game, and he's got that left-handed swing. And Eric, you cover Rome. You don't see many heaters of a 6 home run in Rome,
No.
over 3 weeks. That's not, since like Acuna and Riley were on the same team, heaters like that, they're not common in Rome, right? That's not just that's not a home run ballpark. So
yeah, that second half heater from Austin Riley was something else, though.
Oh, that was great. He had 20 home runs in the second half of the season.
Something like that. It was something nuts, yeah.
So you got to talk about Jesse Franklin. Another guy I want to talk about, and I want to give a little shout out. I want to be a downer, but this guy is someone that I'll always watch, and he turns out he's a 100 prospect now. Seth Corey. He was the last guy. Here's why I'm saying I don't want to be a downer. He was the last guy that I had a conversation with John Calvano about. It was a guy that he was very high on, and he was in Rome. Corey was in Rome, and I was watching him, and he kept texting me, asking me questions about him. And this was like the last player, and so he'll always be that's how I'll link to him. So I'm watching his rise, right? I want this guy to make it because, Sally Notes, it was a website that was unlike any other, and we miss John. So, but it's not just that. He's actually performing pretty well, right? He's currently striking out 14.4 hitters per 9. The kind of upsetting part is that he's walking an unhealthy 9.42 per 9, but that's very out of place for him. That's not the pitcher he was. When I saw him, I whipped out my notes from that day, and his fastball, this is, again, 3 years ago, his fastball was already in the mid-90s. His curveball was in the 70s, and it was a power curve, and it was better than the fastball. And he would just pound the zone up high and get these young hitters like chasing a high fastball and then end them off with that power curve. And you couldn't do anything. That year he was in the Sally, he was unbelievable. And he's still doing well. He's got a 2.83 ERA if you look at that, because that curve is tough to hit, right? So he has a 170 batting average again. So he's getting out in jams, but he could definitely also be doing a lot better. And he's a guy that I'm watching. I want to see how he moves up the ladder. And then the last guy, and I noticed you put his teammate on your list, is Brett Beatty on the Brooklyn Cyclones. And I saw Brent Hershey was tweeting out tonight, over at Baseball HQ. He was at the game, and he was tweeting out batting practice about Mauricio, who you're going to talk about in a second, and Beatty. And when I hear someone, saying things like he's driving the ball all over the place and he's hitting hard line drives to the gaps. I like to hear that kind of stuff. And he's got the numbers this year. Beatty does. He's hitting 327. He's already got 8 doubles and 5 home runs. And when you look at him at the plate, he's like real wiry and tall and kind of lankyish. So there's even more for him to grow into this power. So he's a 2019 first rounder, and we're kind of seeing that there was a reason for that. So those are 3 guys that I wanted to talk about.
So again, I'll talk to Mauricio a little bit. He's kind of in my I don't know how high my level of concern is with him, but it's just kind of worth mentioning because again, we're talking about he's a top 50 prospect type guy.
Right.
But we're start positive here. Cade Cavalli, former Braves draftee, by the way, and don't tell Matt Powers, our good buddy, that because he thinks that anyone that the Braves drafted, they should have immediately signed and be in the organization. But he was a guy who had a really firm college commitment, ended up going to college, ends up being the Nationals 2020 first rounder, and he's been better than expected. Like the arm speed's been really good, and he's actually been so good. Again, cheating a little bit here. He was just promoted to Double A earlier today. I made this list, and then I went to kind of do some research. I'm like, oh, of course the guy that I was going to be putting in high A is already being put in a different league. But when he was in high A, striking out almost 16 batters per 9 against just like around 2.5 walks per 9, that's hard. I mean, again, a college arm in high A, you expect them to do well. You know what I mean? Like you expect them to perform reasonably well, and that's what we've seen with organizations generally speaking. If you have a first rounder, they're not going to like struggle too much in high A unless like they have real command problems. Obviously, Cavalli in this particular case does not have those problems. He commands his zone well. Off speed stuff, like again, he's a guy that gets some silly swings. The fastball, people are not picking up on. Has a lot of like really tight spin. Always curious now in this day and age just to see how a guy's spin holds up when you don't have access to the same substances that they did maybe a week or 2 ago. But again, pitching really well. Is headed to Double A. I expect him to pitch well there too. He's going to move up lists in a hurry. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Michael Harris, Braves prospect. Again, a third rounder from 2019 that most people when he was drafted thought he was going to be a pitcher in college, but the Braves saw something in him as a hitter. And they signed him for enough money to get him away from a college commitment and put him in the field as an outfielder. I think that we both agree he's going to stick in center field. He's like among the league leaders in batting average over there. The one thing that you can really say with him is that it would be nice if you just had like a week where you just like walked once every game, just to like, because it's not like he's not like this crazy like swinging like at the first 2 pitches guy every single at bat or anything like that. He does put the ball in play a lot, and as a result, like the on base percentage, not doesn't have the gap that you'd like from one of the premier hitters in minor league baseball. But despite only walking 5 times this year, 5 total, he still has a 131 WRC plus. And this is not a guy who's like hitting a ton of home runs or anything like that. He just hits doubles. He just produces every single game. Runs really well. Just like he's a guy that like if he hits a grounder, you better be ready to throw him out because it's not like he's like speed is a huge part of his game, but he can run and he plays hard every single game. And so again, he gets on base a lot for like really like basically crappy defense in high A. He's played center field really well. Even when he gets turned around on a route, he still makes it look easy out there. So he's a guy that I think that I'm really high on. And another guy who's really just been kind of like crazy good. I love catchers who rake. I just do. I mean, because at the end of the day, if they can't stick a catcher for whatever reason, which happens a decent bit in minor league baseball, just like a guy's body doesn't hold up, or they decide, hey, we really need this bat. We want to make sure he can last more than 5 seasons. And again, I don't think that the 200 WRC plus through 19 games that he's put up is not sustainable. But he's hitting the crap. He's hitting the crap out of the ball. He probably needs a promotion to Double A soon. And so as it turns out, when you pay a guy $2.5 million as an international free agent, sometimes that's not just money you blow and you just throw away. Sometimes when you sign the best international free agents, you get a really, really good player. That's exactly what the Dodgers got. And in the case of Ronnie Mauricio, again, he's a guy that I still have high hopes for. He's still a top 50 prospect, and it's not something that like I think about like super long-term concerns because he hasn't been bad enough to make me think, hey, this is a guy who is like maybe not going to ever figure it out. But he is 20 years old. and he has that pedigree of like being a guy who we thought that he was going to really produce. And he's put up some power numbers. He's hit 7 home runs this year, and that's kind of, again, kept him above that 100 WRC plus threshold. But hitting 234, it's a pretty low walk rate too, and it's really limited that production. I mean, is that kind of what you're expecting? I mean, that's not what I was expecting to see from him, considering how highly touted he was. What do you make of him? I guess is the best way to.
You know what he kind of reminds me of, and not by. Just in expectations and what you're talking about being highly touted, and then the reality of the way he's performing is, I don't know if you remember the Mets prospect Desmond Lindsay, right? He was a guy,
yeah,
right? He was the guy that was supposed to be the next great outfielder, and he kind of just hung around Columbia for like a couple years, and just I don't even know if he's still in the organization, and that's kind of where I see Ronnie right now, right? But like you said, the power is there, right? I don't know that Lindsay, in batting practice, you saw him hit it, but not in the game, right? Whereas here you do see
sure.
that. So I think Mauricio is definitely behind where I would expect him to be right now, but I don't think that I think there's definitely the raw power is developing, and I think he's just taking a little bit, maybe the year layoff. I hate to make that an excuse for everyone we talk about, but I think maybe that it's just catching up to him, and I think he's still trending in the right direction. Put it that way. I don't think he's Desmond Lindsay yet.
Yeah, it's definitely not fair. I mean, he's 20 years old, but at the end of the day, he is 20 years old. That's not like a 25-year-old guy who, like, you're just like, well, he's just done, right? So, like, again, I did expect a little bit more. And the layoff could have been a real thing. And speaking of the layoff, I will tell you now that I don't think we're going to plan on dwelling too long on what's going on in low A, because these are a lot of guys who didn't have access to the alternate site, who have had layoffs, and, like, evaluating guys in low A this year has been particularly difficult, because it's just like, the guys who are really good, we're only there for just a little bit. A lot of teams are just cycling guys through their low A teams just to try to figure out who they have. Like, just finding guys with like enough qualified at bats to be reasonable to talk about is actually like a little bit problematic, right? So, but we do want to touch on some guys to talk about low A. Wayne, who you got?
One guy I'm a little upset is Asa Lacy. I loved Lacy at Texas A&M, right? He's big. He was like 6'4", 6'5". He's a lefty, and in college he just overpowered hitters, and it was fun to watch him pitch. And in 2020, before the shutdown, I mean, he was absurd. Like, he was untouchable. He struck out 46 in 24 innings, and he went 4th overall in last year's draft. And he is in low A, and I know it was the layoff. And I'm not 100% sure, but I believe he was in the alt site. So he did get a little bit of action. And he's on the Royals, right? And the Royals kind of have these exciting young arms. You got Lynch, you got Kowar, you got Singer, and then you thought Lacy was going to kind of fit in there. But in his first 23 innings pitched this year, again, I'm not worried about the ERA, which is very high, as I mentioned before, but I am worried about the fact that in 23 innings, he's let up 17 hits and 19 walks, right? That is concerning.
It's a lot of walks.
That's a lot of walks for 23 innings, and that is not anything like what he was in college, right? He was a fill the strike zone type of attack the hitter type of guy. So it's a little concerning, but again, yes, we're over a month and a half into the season, but for a pitcher, you're talking about 4 starts, right? It's not. I'm not saying I'm selling out on the guy, but at low A, I kind of expected him to jump into the scene and be like, woo! But and then I'm going homer again. I'm going to talk about Anthony Volpe. He started off slow this year. If you're a college baseball fan, he's from a little high school in Morristown, New Jersey called Del Barton. And if you're watching the College World Series, you'll know his teammate, one Jack Leiter, is now on Vanderbilt and pitching in the College World Series.
Is he good? I think he's good, right?
They're saying he might get drafted this year, and he's a guy that you should know.
Might make it.
Yeah. So, but Volpe, like I said, he started off slow, but he is scorching hot in June. This is the guy that the Yankees drafted in the first round, and he's showing it. He's hitting 388, 4 doubles, 4 home runs, 13 RBI. He's he was drafted as an athletic contact hitter, right? A guy that could spray the gaps. And the 4 home runs in June, it's June 17th. So for him to have 4 home runs, that's a very pleasant surprise. Is it someone playing in low A taking advantage of some pitching? Maybe, but it's definitely something to be excited about when power was probably his weakest tool. So, and then the last guy I just want to throw out there is another college guy because I love the college guys. It was a guy I saw hit a grand slam in Omaha, and that's Jordan Westburg from Mississippi State. He's on the Ironbirds, and you're kind of talking about it. Low A is kind of like you're just looking for something good, and he's been good, and he's hitting 307 with 3 home runs and 6 stolen bases, and he's a guy I would love to see actually succeed and climb the ladder. He may be nothing more than a nice bench piece or depth, but he's a guy I would love to see succeed.
Absolutely. Before we get into my guys, I do want to mention he was in the Chris Archer. Shane Baz was in the Chris Archer deal along with Glasnow and Austin Meadows. Again, friendly reminder that for Chris Archer, who I think it's safe to say didn't work out super well for those who have acquired him. They got Shane Baz, Tyler Glasnow, and Austin Meadows, which just don't trade with the Rays. Just don't do it.
Wow.
Just word to the wise. So I do have a few names here. I'll say this: Joe Gray was a name that when he was like the 2018 draft was happening, he was kind of mentioned as a bottom of the first round guy based purely on like his athleticism and what he could potentially be going forward. But everyone was concerned about his hit tool, and that's why he ended up dropping into the second round. And it looked like those first 2 years when he was a pro, when he got drafted by the Brewers, that those fears were well founded because like he didn't bat above 200 in either of his pro debuts. His 2019 season, his WRC plus was 57, which was again atrocious. But looks like that the time has certainly gotten him back on track in full season ball in low A. Has a WRC plus, again, unsustainably at 189. We're not going to see that, but he's walking again at a 13.6 rate. We love to see that. He's striking out 28% of the time, which, frankly, in low A, what you're seeing in low A right now, it's not surprising at all with the layoff and what we're seeing. We're seeing a ton of strikeouts and a ton of walks and what I can only be described as very interesting defensive play. That's what's happening in most of these low A games. And so he's playing really well, hitting over 300. He's, again, already has 10 home runs. This is the guy that he could be. It's just, a guy who probably strikes out more than he should. And again, we're talking about a guy who's 21 years old in low A, so he's gonna probably have to be challenged here before too long, but performing really, really well. There's nothing you can really complain about there. Another guy that I've liked a lot, Jordan Walker for the Cardinals low A affiliate. Again, OPS over 1,000. He has 3 home runs. He's walking at a good rate, striking out at a perfectly passable rate, a little bit under 25%. You just take that every time, particularly with that layoff. Local Georgia kid, by the way. Just want to make sure we're going to throw out the local ties there coming out of Stone Mountain, but performing really, really well. And, for a guy that is a first-round pick back in 2020, playing in low A, you think that a kid that young might be intimidated by being in full season ball? He has not been, hitting a healthy 328. And walking at a good rate and performing, not just hitting a few home runs, he's hitting extra base hits as well. So he's been a really good, well-rounded, all-around hitter. And there's the thing about Walker too, is that he has real power that they think he's going to grow into. So a lot of these power numbers that we're seeing out of him, it's likely that they're going to be getting better over time. How it affects the rest of his numbers in terms of his strikeout rate and stuff, we'll have to wait and see. One guy who's been a little disappointing, but again, with low A guys, we should not extrapolate too much, right? Has been Ed Howard. A lot of folks really, really liked him during that 2020 draft as one of the best prep bats, a really high ceiling bat. The Cubs ended up drafting him at pick 16. Cubs fans were thrilled to get him there. He's struck out in about half of his at bats so far this season, which again hasn't been great. OPS of 515 has not looked good either. But here's the thing. He looks like? He looks like a high school kid in his first season of pro ball, who has a lot of things to figure out. That's all that means, because no one doubts the talent this kid has. No one does. Only 2 extra. Yeah, 2 extra base hits this year. There's no way that sticks. There's no way. It might take a little while for him to figure things out, but he's a really, really talented kid. But unfortunately, his first 15 games as a pro hasn't gone particularly well. Wayne, I think that's all I've got. Is there anything you want to share with our listeners before we let him go?
No, that was fun. I'm just glad we ran down minor league baseball. That was fun.
It was a ton of fun. Thank you again so much to everyone who's listening. Make sure you tell your friends, your family, those that you talk minor league baseball with, to tell them about the podcast. It's Down on the Farm. It should be on basically most of the major podcast purveyors. If it's not on something, let me know. I will send the emails off that need to be sent to make sure that folks know about it. We are going to be coming on each week, and we're going to be talking minor league baseball. We're going to try to rotate different names in, different topics. I'm sure we'll be doing mailbag episodes. I love doing mailbag episodes because I get asked questions that I don't think about, or I just kind of take certain topics for granted. I love getting listener questions too. I'm sure we'll be cycling some of that in as well. But you'll be getting updates on the minor league baseball as a whole from us. And things are going to be getting fun sooner rather than later because it's not just minor league baseball time. The draft is coming up really fast, and I'm going to make sure that we're going to be talking plenty about it. I know Wayne's excited about it. I'm sure he's more excited about sleep because his day job has him running around covering the College World Series a whole bunch right now. But once he kind of things calm down a little bit, we get to dig in on the draft. It's going to be a lot of fun here on the show. Thank you again so much for all the support, and we'll see you next time.